This is Mike Richards, and we are beginning a webinar for the University of Iowa Public-Private Utility Partnership discussion. I'd like to remind you of a couple things. When your speakers are very sensitive, so if you have something that you want to say to somebody else, it is going to be recorded. And if you had something else, some other topic or a call, you need to leave the room probably. When you do have a question, speak directly into your mics so that we can be sure that we get it recorded. And this is a informal meeting. We're going to start with President Harold giving a fairly detailed presentation, and I'd ask everyone to hold your questions until the end. That way we will not interrupt the flow of the slides and the recording of the material. So, and the people in this room do not have their microphones on until after President Harold has spoken. So thank you, and I'm going to turn it over to President Harold.
President Richards, thank you. Could you just put your thumb up if you can hear me? Perfect, thank you very much. With that, if you don't mind, I'd just like to jump into the presentation and start with the slides. Thank you for hosting this webinar. We've got a lot to go through. It's an important update, and I'd be glad to take the questions, any questions you have. I've got with me several representatives who've worked tirelessly over the last, we seem to say it's been the last year, but it seems like to me it's been closer to 2 on this transaction. And this is really updating you on the details of the public-private partnership, the so-called P3, with our utility system. Perhaps a bit of context before we start. I'd like to start by highlighting our long-term slip in the national rankings. Now, while we've improved quite a bit this year, we're still not where we'd like to be. And it's important for our board, our students, our campus, Iowans, and alumni to know that we have a very clear plan for improving this. And that plan is, in fact, our strategic plan that was developed over 4 years ago, and specifically the elements devoted to student success. We know that we must improve our first-year retention rates, our 4-year and 6-year graduation rates, as well as our research and scholarship productivity. And additionally, with your help and the resources to fund the strategic plan, we can impact these numbers, which will improve the outcomes for our students and for Iowans. Funding of the strategic plan is why we've been studying the opportunity of a P3 and what it provides for our university, our students, faculty, and Iowans. The resources that a P3 could bring to bear for the campus, if appropriately invested, will significantly alter our students' outcomes and set us on a more positive overall direction. To be clear, we're not chasing rankings, but we are chasing the key student success metrics that form the foundation of the overall U.S. News and World Report rankings. These metrics tell a story of outcomes and impact. And what you see here are the metrics that roll up to inform the overall U.S. News ranking. There are 2 key measurements that we monitor very closely that inform us on how we're doing in retaining our students and graduating those students. First of all, our 4-year graduation rate, and secondly, our 2nd-year retention rate. The logic here is pretty simple. You can't graduate in 4 years if you don't stay in school. And we know that you're much more likely to graduate in 4 years if you stay through your 2nd year. You see here on this chart that we have essentially plateaued in these efforts since 2009, with a point or 2 increase or decrease year by year. This is starkly different than our peers, and especially in the 4-year graduation rates. And let me be clear, we find this unacceptable as an institution, and we're now searching for appropriate funding to address this. In that context, I'm very excited about the programs that our provost has been developing with each of our deans. Improving these numbers through intentional activities is an area of focus for our entire university. As I've discussed before, our campus is focused on delivering results for our students and Iowans through implementation of our strategic plan. Our current strategic plan will keep our students in school, allow them to graduate in 4 years, and reduce their debt by increasing experiential opportunities, internships, mentoring, through retaining and recruiting the best faculty, by increasing peer-reviewed research, increasing citations, and increasing the national visibility of our faculty, and finally, increasing access to quality healthcare while playing our part in stimulating Iowa's economy. Over the past few years, we have built the mechanisms that will allow us to materially execute this strategic plan, and with your continued support, I'm totally confident we will deliver. Our current strategic plan requires an investment of nearly $33 million per year, and we at the university view that as a shared investment between the university, the students, and the state. The university, for its part, is committed to finding over a third, or $11 million per year, through realignment, savings, and other efficiency activities. This constant evaluation of what we're doing and how we're doing it allows the university to become more impactful in meeting our goals. Merely being more efficient, however, is not enough. It will not fund our strategy of improving our outcomes long term. Therefore, we must have new, sustainable, and predictable resources to invest into our future and to live up to our values. Predictability around tuition is exactly what you've provided us and our families with the board's commitment to a 5-year tuition plan. Once again, thank you. This 5-year tuition plan, as you know, is tied to our appropriation request, and long-term support from the state remains vital in executing our strategic plan. The $7 million request of additional resources from the state is part of this long-term support that is needed to ensure improved outcomes for our students. Well, this now leaves approximately a $15 million gap per year. In order to ensure that the UI strategic plan is resourced, the UI has spent the better part of this year engaged in exploration of a P3 with UI's utility system. What does our utility system look like, and how does it function? Our utility system provides steam for heating and cooling of our campus, along with about 25% of our electricity needs, and as well as potable water for the entire campus. The UI's utility system is paid for by users across campus who are charged market rates. These are users such as colleges, departments, and central units, the hospitals and clinics, residence halls, and athletics. All of this adds up to a budget of roughly $98 million for the UI's utility system. This budget breaks down, as you can see here, to 3 areas. One, $41 million for fuel, electricity, and other purchase services. $23 million for operations and maintenance, i.e. the employees and goods needed to keep the plant operating smoothly. And thirdly, $34 million in debt payments and capital expenditures. Today, the UI owns its utility system, which includes our power plant, water, chilled water, and tunnels. If the university completes this deal, the university will still own the utility system. Let me once again say that, if the university completes this deal, the university will still own this entire utility system. You may be asking at this point, then, what is the benefit to the university and a potential partner? The UI will receive an upfront payment that would be then placed in an endowment. The UI would then spend the proceeds from that endowment to fund our underfunded strategic plan, targeted at improving, of course, student outcomes that I've just described. The partner in this transaction will receive a steady financial return along with tax benefits that the university cannot obtain because we're a nonprofit entity. What does this new partner for our campus look like? On one side of this new entity is an operator and investor. On the other side, it's a financier. These two entities come together to form a new entity that the university will then partner with. Again, this partnership is not a sale of the university's utility system. It's not a strategy to eliminate employee jobs. In fact, if our employees do not want to join this new entity, they will have the choice to stay with the university. The UI will not back up on its commitment to sustainability and being coal-free by 2025. And in fact, this transaction will likely accelerate it. And it's not a replacement for state appropriations. We need our state to continue to meaningfully support our students and faculty well into the future. This slide illustrates the partnership, and I'd like to take some time to walk through it as there are several important considerations and components here. First, the new entity that is created will provide the University of Iowa with an upfront lump sum payment. The UI will then pay the entity a fixed fee for 50 years to operate the plant on behalf of the university. The fixed fee paid to the operator for this service is $35 million per year for years 1 through 5, and will increase by 1.5% each year starting in year 6. The UI will continue to pay for the fuel to operate the plant, the employees to run the plant, and any capital expenditures that need to occur to keep the plant operating efficiently and effectively. These are not new expenses. They are expenses that the university pays today and will continue to pay for the duration of the agreement. Finally, the agreement with this new entity clearly spells out key performance indicators that the operator must achieve or they will face financial penalties. This is a look at the step-by-step process at a 30,000-foot level, if you will, that will take place over the next several months. If the university moves forward and you, the board, approve, we would sign an agreement with the new entity, and our new partner would provide the university with a lump sum payment, as I've said before. The university would take that payment, pay off the bonds that are associated with the utility system, which are roughly $153 million. Next, the university would pay the consulting and advisory fees that we've accumulated during this entire process, which are projected now to be around $13 million. We then place the net proceeds, i.e. the lump sum payment, minus the existing bonds and the consulting fees, into a new 501c3. This new organization, which you, the regents, would vote to create, would then hire an investment firm, invest the net proceeds, and determine the annual allocation to the university in order to implement the strategic plan, as well as provide a subsidy to keep campus utility cost increases within historical trends. At this point, I'd like to get into some of the details and describe how the flow of resources between the university and a new partner work. There are 3 components of the utility fee that the university will pay to our partner. A fixed fee, the $35 million per year, which eventually escalates starting in year 6. Secondly, operating and maintenance costs, i.e. employee salaries and expenses associated with operations. And thirdly, capital expenditures, which are upgrades and major repairs to the utility system. We picked fiscal year 2022 to provide you a financial overview of how this utility fee will look in real life. First, we have that fixed fee payment of $35 million. Second, we have an operations and maintenance fee, if you will, the salaries of the employees to operate the plant, that will continue to be paid for by the university. And I'd like to spend a moment on this issue as it's important. Since the O&M fee is a pass-through, the UI pays the cost. There is no incentive for the new operator to reduce the workforce, as they do not see any savings. In fact, they need these employees in order to maintain the KPIs in the contract. This is why I can confidently state this deal is not about reducing the number of employees. There simply is no incentive for our partner to do so. Finally, we have the capital expenditure component, which is now relatively small, as we've just paid off the bonds. Continuing with fiscal year 22, we'd like to show you the other set of costs within the utility system. The university will continue to pay for the fuel and electricity within the system. Similar to the employee costs, the university will retain the ability to determine what we should be utilizing as fuel within the utility system. This, again, is an important point to stress. Our partner does not have a financial incentive to keep burning coal or more so even natural gas than what is already in our current long-term fuels plan. Net, the university, our board, and our constituents retain the ability to determine our future, particularly with respect to sustainability. Moving on, we're keeping sewer, refuse, fire, and environmental compliance, insurance, and audit within the university. and you see those projected costs as the final lines on the slide. If you will recall, several slides ago, you saw the total amount billed to campus, which in fiscal year 22 would be $99.5 million. 2 slides ago, we walked through the fee, which is it composed of 3 parts, and it is a total cost of $60.3 million. The previous slide also went through the utility costs for fiscal year 22, which is a cost of $45.9 million. Taking the amount billed to campus and subtracting the cost the UI has a subsidy requirement of $6.7 million that would need to be paid for by the P3 endowment. Below that solid line, you will see the subsidy illustrated along with the first full year expenditure for strategic initiatives on campus. These 2 expenditures will require an allocation of $21.7 million from the P3 endowment in fiscal year 22. This slide, in its simplest form, is representing the P&L for the UI's utility system over 50 years and the corresponding distribution from the P3 endowment. You can see for fiscal year 22, which we just walked through on the second column from the left. Fiscal year 26, which is the first year where the $35 million fee to our partner begins, an inflationary increase of 1.5%. And fiscal year 2069 is the final year of the deal. The bottom number, way at the right, is an important figure for each of you to notice. It's a $3 billion number. This is how much the endowment must distribute over 50 years in order to cover the cost of the strategic plan payments to the UI as well as the utility subsidy. $3 billion, I know, is a lot of money. However, put over in the context of 50 years, our modeling projects a need of roughly a 4% return per year on that endowment. To put that into context, the university has averaged around 8% return per year over the past decade. In other words, we've approached this, I believe, from a very conservative risk tolerance perspective in order to reduce the long-term downside risk. 50 years is indeed a long time. We all agree that responsibility for the success of this initiative will rest with each of us. And even with a conservative approach, all of us must maintain discipline in order to ensure success for the future leaders of the university and state. This discipline will live with the university, the Board of Regents, and the state, as each of us play an important role in ensuring the success of this partnership. Part of this discipline will be driven by the 501c3 that we spoke of previously. This organization, created to support the strategic plan of the university, will be managed by 3 members: a Board of Regents member appointed by the Regents, a University of Iowa faculty member appointed by the Faculty Senate for a 4-year term, and the University of Iowa Senior Vice President for Finance and Operations. The board will hire investment advisors and fund managers and will determine the yearly allocation to the university based upon the advice from those advisors and managers. This new organization will be a partner with the university, the regents, and the General Assembly in ensuring the discipline needed over the next 50 years. As I previously stated, the proceeds of a partnership will be placed into an endowment, and only the proceeds would be spent. But to ensure we maximize the use of these new resources, the university is proposing to use an open and transparent grant process. Anyone from our campus community can apply for a grant as long as it impacts the strategic plan, and the grant could last up to 5 years. By treating the resources as a one-time granting activity, the university will be able to maximize the impact of the money while ensuring the discipline we just spoke of. The university will use our existing Path Forward work groups and Path Forward steering committee to vet these proposals. These groups, as you know, are populated with experts, shared governance leaders, as well as overall university leadership. By utilizing our existing budgeting process and budget review board, the entire campus will be fully integrated into the process. As I've stated many times to you before, a strong culture needs to be transparent, have clear accountability, be flexible, and connect to the institution's strategy. And that's just what we are and have built at the university with our Path Forward process. We expect this transparency and accountability will also enhance your ability to hold us accountable as we work to execute our strategic plan. With large complex issues such as this, I always like to return to the beginning, the first order principle. The why are we doing this? And what will success look like if this agreement is accomplished? Our university was created at the founding of our state in order to serve the citizens of this state. This partnership will support that original mission. The core functions of our university return to this original agreement with our citizens: teaching, research, and engagement. This agreement with our state was encapsulated by our former university president, Bowen, when he described a faculty committed to advancing teaching formed by active research. Our strategic plan can be brought to this simple concept as we know the outcomes will be improved for our students, our faculty, and ultimately the state of Iowa and the citizens of the state. Sorry for the length and detail, but I think it was necessary given the importance of this transaction and its complexity. And now I'd be glad to take any questions you may have.
We will have questions, and I would say that if let's kind of alternate and start with someone who's on the webinar, and then we'll try to go around here, but this is still informal, and it is President Harold that we're asking the questions of, and his team. I'm going to start with, just start it off, and then I think that we won't necessarily call on anybody. It'll be just a little more spontaneous than that. But and let's just try not to overtalk each other. I'm going to start with Nancy Dunkel.
Hi, Mike. I do have a question. Who decides what capital expenditures are necessary and when?
The university, as we do today. I think it's the simplest way to say that. Terry, would you add anything to that?
No, actually, it's the University of Iowa that will have final approval on all capital expenditures. We'll work with our new partner on developing a 5-year capital plan, but we will only commit to the upcoming fiscal year's capital plan. But again, must be approved by the University of Iowa.
And I would say that is one of 2 or 3 areas where we've decided, like the purchasing of fuels, or the employee expenses, or that we've decided to keep within the university so that we can guarantee certain commitments going forward that we've maintained in the past.
But just to be clear, we will approve the capital projects, but the capital projects will be funded by the partner, and we will pay back those capital improvement projects generally over a 20-year amortization period.
I have a follow-up question. What would you say the state of repair of the facility is right now?
Before we started this process, knowing that we're going to have a lot of potential bidders coming through, we actually hired an outside engineering firm to do a very exhaustive, independent, and not even in the state of Iowa, someone from another part of the country, to come in and take a look at all the assets and some of the operations. And they gave us a very positive bill of health. And so I would say, President Richards, that our current state is very positive, as we'll just see in a week's time when we reveal some of the bidding. I think it does in fact reflect that the people who are bidding on this were bidding in their minds on a very first-rate operation with not a lot of operational holes, if you will, in it.
President Harold, this is Sherry Bates. I just have a question about a 50-year lease is a very long time commitment. Has the university ever been in that long of a lease before?
Yes, this is not something new. We've used 50-year leases in a couple of other areas, most notably in research and our research park, several facilities out there, including the Kirkwood facility. I suspect you've all had meetings with us out there. That's a 50-year lease. Other facilities out there are as well. The Ronald McDonald House on our campus was a 50-year lease. So this is not we're not carving new territory here, but it is a long time.
Okay, thank you.
Regent Barker?
President Harold, on I think it's slide 6, you showed $23 million for operations and maintenance, and on slide 12, it shows $21.4 million for maintenance. Could you just explain why those numbers are different?
Yeah, well, Terry, our CFO can answer it. I will also tell you, they're both actually the same number. They aren't technically the same number, but if you look on which slide was it, Regent Barker, 12? If you look,
I think it's slide 6 and 12. Yeah.
Maybe 12 or my numbers. Let me just get to that slide. If you hold on, let me get to it. I've got numbers and they're not working. Just a second. Yeah. So in my slide 15, I believe the number is slide 15. Sorry if there's a confusion in numbers. You'll see that the 21.4 there is different than the slide earlier that you referenced. But if you look at the very next slide, 16, you see the last two items, 4.56 and 2.01. Part of that 4.56 and 2.01 is actually goes back into that 21.4 to compare to what you had earlier. So we're, in a sense, putting them in slightly different buckets, but all the numbers are, in fact, exactly the same. How'd I do, Terry?
You did quite well. So there are some costs that we're definitely having to retain at the university. And in that 45.9 million on slide 15, a good example is insurance in particular. And typically, someone that would come in and manage a power plant like ours on our behalf would want to also retain responsibility for the insurance. But we had a major flood, as you know, in 2008. And we've got a long history of working with FEMA. And because of that legacy and that experience, we made it mandatory for us to enter into this agreement that we would continue to be responsible for the property insurance for the power plant, the utility system. And that's a significant number, and is most of that difference between the 21 and that 23. It's in that 2.01, but part of the 4.56 is also some of those costs as well.
So we just pulled that 23 million apart and are counting for it differently in slightly different buckets for the reasons Terry just explained. So, but it's all there.
Got it. Thank you. Just on that same slide, the capital expenditure of 3.8 million. Where does that number? Does that include principal and interest on the repayment? And where does the interest rate come from on that?
Yes, that's a good question. So it is the accumulated principal and interest payments that the investment has been made by the new operator. And so the first year actually is fiscal 20, but that's a partial year. It might be 3 or 4 months, depending on when we actually achieve financial close, and assuming you approve the agreement. And so the first full year, which they'll be fully responsible for the capital improvements, is really fiscal 21. Improvements made in fiscal 21 don't begin to be repaid until fiscal 22. And there is a amortization, or so a principal piece related to that. And there's also an interest component, both of which sum to that 3.8 million.
And the interest rate on that, where does that come from?
There's two parts to that interest rate factor. It's looking at Iowa and the state surrounding Iowa as far as utility rate petitions to the various states' utility rate boards. And whenever that petition occurs, they disclose what their expected return on equity is. They also disclose what their debt factor is. In our case, we're taking that return on equity factor and pulling it into the calculation, and that will be equal to basically half of that interest rate. There is a separate benchmark that we're using to determine the interest rate factor, and that equals the other half, other 50% of the full interest rate itself.
So let me say that, Regent Barker, in economic and financial terms, we're taking the industry weighted average cost of capital and using that as the interest rate.
Got it. Thank you.
Mike,
Regent Butker?
thank you. Can you describe what the key performance indicators are and how they are developed and how are they measured?
Sure. Generally, and again, it's been the level of specificity. This contract gets quite specific on those indicators. There are a set of operating expectations. Simply put, we need to always supply steam during certain times of the year to our campus. We always need to have electricity. We always need to have water. So at a high level, they're basically saying, here are the requirements for what we expect operationally 24/7 from this facility. And they break down into each of those areas with very specific criteria. And they say, and if they're not met for some particular reason, like we have an outage, unexpected outage, well, we have backup plans, and we would then click into those backup plans to make sure we still have energy or steam or whatever. But yet the operator has just faulted in some respect, and there is a negotiated in the contract penalty, financial penalty for each one of those. And if they become so frequent, there's actually ultimately, and none of us ever want to get here, that we could actually erase this contract and remove the partner. That's what they are at a very high level.
Mike, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
You spoke, I think, in your presentation about growing the endowment even while you start tapping it. Do you have a formula for that on what percentage you will share to affect your strategic plan? And then you need to inflate that $15 million figure as you go out 50 years or so.
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, we've done an incredible amount of modeling here with the help of our College of Business, particularly Tom Reitz, Professor Reitz. We first of all have pegged this, Regent Lindemeyer, around the gap in our funding from our strategic plan. And that original gap, the gap currently in today's dollars is about $14 to $16 billion. That's where the 15 came from. And we've kind of designed it around that and said, how big do we need the endowment to be? And then we started modeling prospective returns based on historical returns. And we tried to be, as I said earlier, quite conservative on that. And then ultimately, we've left that issue in the hands of the trustees, the 501c3. I think if the future looks anything like the past, including a 2008 fiscal collapse, we could well see that annual return of this endowment be much higher than 15 million. But we've left that to the board of trustees, if you will, for this endowment to determine, so that we don't overspend and overfund based on expectations that don't materialize. So I hope I described it. So it's starting from where we are and what the gap is. We think that's quite easily accomplishable in this. We've also waited on purpose for the we're not going to take anything out of this endowment for the whole first year. So we're going to let the markets accrue some appreciation here. And our intent is to never touch the corpus here of the original proceeds. And that gives us then another fairly substantial security blanket. Terry, you want to add anything?
I would say that if we achieved a 4% return over time with all the market volatility, we will earn that $3 billion that we talked about, meaning we would end with zero. Because the upfront payment is included in that
Stream of cash
calculations, the stream of cash flows. So that's the beginning point. We expect we can definitely do better than that, but what is important to understand really, and if one of the earlier slides where you that had that 3 billion in the lower right-hand corner, you can see how that draw on the endowment income increases year over year over year. And so what we've thought a lot about already, but we need to spend some time, and that P3 501c3 board needs to think about this as well, and pretty early on, is how to model the expected demand on those future cash flow payments to the university with respect to how the market appreciation is going. And there's going to be a pretty regular and constant monitoring of that interchange, essentially. How much are we earning and how much are we paying out? And so this is something we will definitely take into consideration, but I'll shore up or support what President Harold said, and that we expect to do better than what we modeled on this return.
Yeah, and I think at a university like ours and most major universities, the one thing that I think many people don't appreciate, and I'm after several years now really appreciating, is predictability of funding is actually more important than the absolute level of funding. So one of the things we've tried to really model here is the predictability. So we've been conservative, but even if a year or two we have really high rates of return in that endowment, I wouldn't be an advocate for reaching in and dramatically taking the 15 million up to something much higher, maybe using a rolling average sort of a notion here to be always a little on the conservative side.
Especially in the early years.
So particularly in the year. We get through the first 7 or 8 years of this thing, as we plan, we're going to be in really good shape. But if we don't, we won't be. So,
Regent Barker.
If I could just follow up on that, I think, Terry, you were saying that if the returns were fairly low, like 4%, that would mean the principal would be paid out entirely over that 50 years. If I understand it correctly, that's not a catastrophic outcome, right? Because after 50 years, we still own the plant and could do this all over again. Am I saying that right?
That's exactly right.
Absolutely right. In fact, I think an interesting question is 50 years from now, wouldn't we like to be at zero or slightly positive? But to your point, we will then have lived through this transaction and could do it all over again. And so, yes, we haven't mortgaged our future, long-term future. We have actually signed up for the next 50 years with a partner, but we haven't committed any of that. Those assets are still ours, and we can do it all over again. And going to zero is not a bad thing. It's actually how we modeled it.
I'd like, Mark Brown has a question.
So can you explain why the fixed fee is 35 million, how that got set? And then my follow-up is, would the taxpayers ever be responsible for making this payment at any point in the future?
Well, let me take the last. The answer is definitively no, it's the university. But the 35 million, in a set, one other way of looking at this transaction, and I was talking to someone yesterday trying to help them understand it, and I said it this way: we've picked the structure of this, and Terry, don't take me down to the decimal point here, but on average, we're not paying any more or any less than we do today. We're just restructuring it, and part of that is we're paying off the bonds, which are in the $30 million sort of range. So the 35, Mark, basically came from modeling, taking the current cash flows and keeping them roughly the same. And we then started working from that, saying we're not going to actually pay any more than we're currently paying. And I'll come back to that in a moment. And we're going to structure this deal so that everything's pretty much the same as we have, but we're going to bring in an extra partner who's then going to be able to have a different cost of capital and different tax benefits that we don't have because we're a public entity. So that's how we got to the 35, roughly. I mean, I think the numbers are 30,
right.
36 or 37.
Well, if you go back to one of the earlier slides, we had the slide to show the $98 million budget into those three buckets.
Yeah.
The one on the right-hand side of the right-hand side bucket was 34 million in debt and capital expenditures. And there's two parts to that. There's money that we've built into the budget every year that creates cash flow that we invest in the utility enterprise. And that's about half of that 34 million. The other half is equal to the annual debt service for the bonds that we sold over time to make large capital improvements or additions to the utility system.
And so the first move we have is defeasing those bonds, getting them out of the way. Now that 34 million, instead of going to the bondholders through interest payments and capital payments, goes to the concessionaire for this transaction. Then going back to your tax question, go ahead. I'm sorry, please.
Well, so you charge everyone on campus the same utility rate. So the hospital, athletics, residence halls all pay the same utility rate, the same charge.
Absolutely. And they may all pay different levels based on different usage.
Right.
But, we are Iowans. We're very egalitarian. Everyone pays the current market rates for energy and utility. Athletics pays, hospitals pay, the collegiate, residence halls, everyone pays the same dollar per unit across the campus. Yep. And I was just going to add that, I think an interesting question here is I'm not a tax expert, but yes, there's some tax advantage here, particularly federally, for the concessionaire by creation of this structure that they will approve, but also would say this entity will pay taxes in the state. This new entity will now be operating here, and also new entity will be paying federal taxes. So I'm not sure whether the overall tax, my suspicion is overall taxes actually will go up. And it's a good thing for the overall economy of the state and the United States government.
President Harold, this is Mike Richards. A number of people have asked me, legislators and others, wouldn't it be just better to subsidize tuition or lower tuition rates for the students rather than go through all this big process? And I have a question, and what's your response to that?
Well, I start everything with student success and outcomes. I think if we actually reduce the tuition and use the money to actually not compete, if you will, on graduation rates with our peers. The problem we have is we're in a glide path to mediocrity. We've been dropping in the rankings for a decade or more. And so I think that those that then want to spend the money by reducing the tuition say, okay, well, we're not going to put that money back up against the support systems we need to graduate our students on time and to get them productive into the economy. So in a sense, that's interesting, but it doesn't solve the problem that we have. I think we owe our students and citizens in the state a much better, higher quality education than we're delivering, to be blunt about it. And I think we know how to do it. So just, not taking the money and just dropping tuition doesn't solve the problem. I think it could make it worse.
Regent Barker.
On the slide titled Fiscal Year 2022 University Summary, there's the subsidy need from the endowment of $6.7 million. Why is that coming from the endowment instead of, say, increasing the billings to the rest of the campus?
Well, you could take it out of one pocket or the other. I think our overall philosophy is that we've historically had our operating units, hospital, athletics, residence halls, all our colleges and departments pay at market rates. And once we violate that, I think it starts getting messy. So we actually said we'll continue that. We'll charge them at market rates, as we described earlier. And in this transaction, we said, no, when we'll pull the excess out of the endowment, which is actually, I think, where it belongs.
Keeping the campus harmless.
Keeping the campus harmless. Nothing changes from how they have been operating.
Thanks.
So, I think, I'll just say, politically, I'll say this to with my UIHC friends who I'm sure are on the line somewhere. If we'd started off by saying, we're going to take your electrical costs or steam heating costs up as a result of this transaction, I think we would have a much longer negotiation with them, because as you well know, they're struggling every day for every dollar they can make to fund their capital needs for their research as well as patient hospital needs. So we just said, no, this is another must have. We'll keep the costs exactly the way they are today. And we'll take that charge of 6.7, if you will, on this slide, comes out of the endowment. Terry? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. It was a philosophical point.
Regent Bates.
Yes, President Harold, this is Sherry Bates. Just the P3 board sounds like a very extremely important board. And I see there's only 3 members on that, which seems kind of small. If you could speak to the reasons behind that. And then the second part of that will that work of that board be made public?
Well, let me again take the second question first. I mean, everything, this whole transaction and everything we do, and including the board moving forward, will be transparent and in the public domain. So that's simple. The size of the board is an interesting question. And I would first of all say that's up to you. It is. I mean, ultimately, this is your board, and I think you're going to have to vote on creation of it. But as we've looked at other entities like this and tried to do some benchmarking and talked to other people and gotten some other advisors involved on boards like this, one of the points that they've made several times in different ways is as the size of a board expands, the participation of each member often declines. And I think we would like this to be a really working board. Right. And we think it's really important for the members to stay fully engaged with us as to what we're trying to get done strategically, as well as what the proceeds and returns are off the endowment. So we said, look, 3 is a nice number. They can get together quickly. They can make decisions quickly. And they also can have spirited debate. And if you get it to 5, 7, I think I'm picking odd numbers for obvious reasons for voting purposes. You start expanding you start getting into a little bit of bureaucracy and the notion that maybe I, as a member, don't need to participate quite as much. So that was the feedback we got. That's how we came up with 3.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
I guess if I also just think about it, I'm sorry, one more comment. Those are the critical entities we think need to be involved in this. We got 3 and said, fine, let's just stick it to the 3. The board clearly needs to be involved. Our faculty clearly needs to be involved in this. And clearly keeping as close as possible to the financial operations of the university, Rod and his team are aggressively thinking about the funding long-term of the university. So so we also got the three entities who really needed to be involved. That's how we got there.
Okay.
No magic.
Thank you.
Just turning to any of the other regions that are online, does anybody else have a question? We haven't heard anything from anyone recently. It's my fault.
This is Milt, if you can hear me.
Yeah. This is Regent Dakovich.
President Harold, would the proceeds from the endowment uses for the strategic plan, could that or would that ever be used for capital needs?
Once again, I'm now into the purview of this 3-person board we've talked about, and I think it's ultimately up to them. But we do not envision it to be used that way. We envision it to be programmatic and particularly focused on our strategic plan. Our strategic plan does not, I don't know, I'm just double check maybe anyone, call for any buildings. It calls for a lot of investment around students, mentoring, tutoring, support programs, increasing commitments and support for reduction of the increases in retention rates and all the rest. Some more in research. So, but if I were voting for it, I would say, no, this should be all programmatic. But I think, again, that's up to the board.
I think it's also up to the process that we've laid out in this document with the path forward, the shared governance teams coming together. We have yet, Regent Dakovich, to predict how the various groups on campus, academic and otherwise, coming through the path forward process will present specific initiatives, physical or not, program or not, to those groups. And if one of those groups forwards a project or an initiative that has a tangible business plan showing improvements on those key performance indicators, on graduation rate, on retention, on success of research, those are the things that will be reviewed at a university level, at that level, not by the board of the 501c3, but through Path Forward and through our budget review board. And we expect a great deal of creativity, but we also expect a great deal of scrutinizing of each of those to make sure that every dollar that is invested in improving our student success, improving our research, and the elements of our strategic plan will be measurable, will be tested on a regular basis, and we'll make sure that the payback on those investments are real when we look at the ways that our students succeed.
Yeah, but let me give you an example. I mean, we know, and we've been doing some work here on campus for the last year or so on the issue of second-year live-in for our undergraduate students. And in fact, Iowa State and a number of other universities have longer reach into their second-year undergraduates and have residence halls that meet those needs. We stop at the first year. And as we've looked at that, and we've looked at benchmark with a number of other institutions, we know with some degree of confidence that the longer our students stay in residence halls, the better their grades are, the better retention rates they have, et cetera, et cetera. So you could connect these dots. But then, as Rod just mentioned to me, he uses the word auxiliary. We tend to fund that not through the general education fund of the university, that's through an auxiliary. So I don't know that we would ever cross these lines, but you can get into some of these issues of where capital might make a difference, particularly in research. So I don't want to say never, but right now our intention is much more programmatic than it is capital. And I think the history of a lot of public institutions, they've spent a lot of money on capital infrastructure. And I just kind of wag my finger at that just to make it personal, because I think, no, we need to get back to focusing on our students, and most of that's programmatic.
Okay, thank you.
Regent Barker.
On the P3 resource allocation slide, it says there can be up to a 5-year grant.
Yes.
Is that a hard rule, or will the board be able to extend a grant or something like that?
Absolutely, the board could. I don't want to rule out anything from that group. Having said that, as we've thought about it and worked the issue across campus, we've really thought that that what happens is if you say, oh well, we're going to let that be a 10-year, just to say, well then you've decreased by half the amount of resources you have available every year. So our philosophy here is, in this program, is to put a meaningful piece of time on it. 5 years, let's say, it could be 3 years. But then at the end of that, all the while that's going on, is to be thinking, if it's successful, how do we find a funding mechanism for the long term for this successful program? So we might use philanthropy. We might actually find other mechanisms to fund it. And then we could actually repurpose that money for other activities moving forward. So that's the reason we use this granting notion. And I think universities tend to use grants a lot for that reason. They're used to it.
Viewed as seed money as opposed to recurring
seed money's
base
not a
funding.
bad. Yeah, a jump starting of an important initiative. And if it pays off, great. The other side of this is I think the industry is littered with people that start things and never stop them. And so we're trying to design into this a stopping mechanism. So early on, as you're thinking about what the outcomes will be against the strategic plan, we're starting to think about, okay, how do we get permanent financing? And we're giving ourselves some period of time to get creative about that.
Thank you.
President Richards.
Yes. Regent Dunkel.
President Harold, how about the employees? Have you been in touch with them? And I see that you continue to employ them as we go into this contract.
The Not necessarily on the last statement. We've been in contact with them. I don't have them in front of me, but we've had multiple town hall meetings for the last year on both sides of campus. We got another couple coming up next week or end of this week. We have met with them individually. We've met with the leaders. In many cases, they've done their own benchmarking of possible bidders. So there's been an enormous amount of communication with our employees. There are 122, the last time I checked, that are in this. This entity is offering 100 for all of them, all 122, meaningful employment. And it will have to go case by case, but at meaningfully similar salaries. In some cases, their benefit packages are a little bit better. In some cases, not as good, depending upon where you are in your career cycle. But our statement has been, if people, it's the employee's choice. And keep in mind, this concessionaire is going to need them to operate this facility. And we're actually working with the concessionaire to convert as many employees as possible. Next week, when we talk with more specifics, I'll share with you. But the entity that's likely to be on the table for our recommendation is into the high 80% of conversion of employees in these types of situations. What we then also have said, we're not going to leave any employee high and dry. And so if it's not right for them because the benefit package isn't excellent or whatever, they can stay working for the university. So we've had an enormous amount of communication about this. But some of them could well transfer to working and become employees long term for this new entity. And in some cases, keep in mind, if you're interested in the utility business, we've only got one of these. This concessionaire operates facilities like this around the world. And so it could be a very career advancing opportunity for some employees as well.
We might also point out that of the 120 or so that we have, we do have roles within our partnership that we will be retaining.
Yes.
Certain elements we've talked about, fuel procurement and some other elements of the utility system that we are retaining. So a certain small number of those are positions that we will want to retain at the University of Iowa.
Yeah, so not all 122.
Correct.
Thanks for the correction. Yeah.
In the realm of fuel procurement, I noticed in your model that the university will continue to buy the fuel. Is there an advantage to the university in doing that rather than having the operator do it?
Perhaps. Well, maybe not. Regent Lindenmeyer, the reason we did that is to make sure that there's no games played around our sustainability commitments. We've said by 2025 we're going to be coal free. I think we can accelerate it by keeping control of the purchasing of the fuels. We'll be able to guarantee that we'll be able to make that commitment and maybe even accelerate it. So, go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I'd also add to that over this last decade, 15 years, we have on a university level been a very aggressive university in exploring renewable or biofuel options in the power plant, allowing us to get to a point where we're going off of coal and recognize nationally, at least among our peers, for that work in, for instance, oat hull burning, energy pellets in our miscanthus that we burn as a substitution for coal. It's a strength of ours. And so in working through this, we also feel that this is something that we can bring to the table.
Yeah, and let me go one more step, because I think a lot of people are playing some funny games here, where they talk about being coal free and they jump to natural gas. Well, yeah, natural gas is probably a lot less polluting in many respects than coal, but on the other hand, it's still a fossil fuel. And so what we've actually are saying, keeping the control of the fuel purchasing is control of that we're skipping over a lot of the fossil fuels into a biomass sort of environment. This is our mechanism of staying more in control, more than anything else.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Regent Butker.
Yes, the question that I had was relative to the Quaker Oats contract and the farmers that are growing those and your intention to keep that. And then I'm thinking about over 50 years, stuff can change so much, so drastically. Who will be making those ultimate decisions on outer space energy or whatever kind of crazy thing may be on the horizon?
The university.
Okay.
That, that goes right back to this last question.
Yeah.
If we pass that on to another entity, we would not have certainty on the answer to that. So the university will.
But we'd also say that the partner that we're going to engage with,
Yeah, sure.
these are national and worldwide recognized
Absolutely.
energy sector experts, and it gives us an opportunity as a university to test some of those new ideas, whether it's outer space energy or not, the different ways to become renewable, become more innovative, and a front runner on those.
Well, so the criteria we have used all the way through this has been, of course, the financials, but more importantly, in many respects, has been the quality of their operations, how well they run the facilities, how smoothly they transition employees, their commitment to taking care of employees, not in just the transition, but longer term, i.e., what's their track record with their own employees? If it were an entity that had only been around for 5 to 6 to 10 years versus an entity that's been around for 80 or more years, that's different. So we've looked at that. We've looked at their commitment long term to genuine sustainability. And I say that in taking this shot at coal and natural gas. I think we can do much better than that. And the globe needs much better than that. And so in each of these areas of employees, sustainability, operating performance, the key criteria we've used have been long-term views that would be the best long-term partner for us. And we'll say more about that next week.
And Bruce, I'd add long-term partner for them. I think what we learned in the finalists coming and evaluating our facilities and having our folks in utilities and energy management guide them through those facilities, they found a very strong partner. It's made this successful. They have found that we would be a very strong partner, that the experts in utilities and energy management are the reason that we're a good partner, which is why we know, and they have stated, they absolutely look to have our people on their team as they move forward because of the strength we displayed as they investigated us just as we investigated them.
Great, thank you.
Regent Bates.
Yes, President Harold, P3s are new to Iowa, new to us. Can you give some examples? I'm sure you've searched out other P3s throughout the United States. Can you give us some of those examples?
Yeah, I think they're becoming more and more popular. Of course, Ohio State's done 2 of them. They did one originally on parking. They've done one similar to this around their own utility system, although I think the utility system is configured differently than ours. And they certainly didn't use the endowment mechanism we're talking about here. So Ohio State's done them. We've also seen them out west as a number of the California university systems as they're starting there. There are discussions in Georgia of residence halls. I think even Harvard is taking a shot, taking a look at its utility system that sits there in the Charles. So they're becoming more and more common. They've also been used in the type of financial structure we're talking about here. Have been used in toll roads across the United States, as well as athletic sporting facilities in major metropolitan areas across the United States. They tend to be a little more popular in Europe and in South America, and now they're starting to come to the United States in the last few years. So we're not on the early edge, but we're on the leading edge, if you will, of this.
Thank you.
And again, I'm sorry to keep rambling here, but I think it's important. I mean, I'm not so sure that all of you have seen many times my slides on every state in the union and the defunding, deappropriation across all 50 states over the last 25 years in public higher education. And as that's occurred, not only has tuition gone up in many cases to replace that, And it has not, our tuition's not even coming close to replacing the de-appropriation over the last 25 years here in Iowa. But if that hadn't occurred, I'm not so sure we would have moved to this sort of creative financing that we're now talking about here. But if we want to keep higher education as a high quality higher public education, we need to be looking for mechanisms like this. And I think that was the original logic behind the governor sending us a letter a year and a half ago along these lines, saying, could you please think about more creative financing and philanthropic measures? And we took that to heart, and here we are.
I think we're getting close to a wrap-up time here, and let's go through. I don't want to cut anybody short, and Regent Butker has a question, but and anybody else that has any other questions, let's start to think that we've covered things here.
I just want to ask, is there any negative effects that could happen for the state taxes or federal taxes based on this deal? Just
not that I'm aware of. Anybody else?
We've done the modeling for this over the full 50 years. They're going to pay probably $700+ million in federal and state income tax. I'd say probably, I don't know, maybe 30% is to the state, the balance to the federal government, something like that, based on the tax rates that we're using in the model. So it's going to be a big benefit to both the state of Iowa as well as the federal government.
Yeah. So today, this $100 million in total, roughly, of operating costs sits within a non-tax-paying entity. And we're sliding out, let's say, a third of that, 35 million, roughly, and putting that in a new corporation that doesn't exist. And it will then be a taxpayer in the state as well as nationally. Yeah, so no, I don't think so, Regent Butker, at all.
it'll be positive, actually.
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from any of the other regents or any other further statements that President Harold that you'd like to bring out?
I have a question.
Regent Least? Yeah.
Yeah, Zach. So I see the current goal for U of I is to be coal-free by 2025. Do you think this goal is going to change with this partnership? Do you think that could be accomplished sooner than the 2025 date, or what are your opinions on that?
Yeah, first of all, we need to let the operator get in here. They've already done quite a bit of work already, and they've indicated to us they think they can accelerate that quite a bit. I'm not fully there to commit to that until they've done some work, but yes, Zach, I fully believe that we're going to substantially beat that 2025 goal. In fact, we're going through the last conversion of the last boiler this summer. We can't do anything too quickly because of the heating season, and this is not an electrical. We produce electricity, but that's oh, by the way, the primary source is for heating across our campus. And we're now, as we well know, getting into a heating season. And so as soon as we get on the other side of it in the spring, our plans are to convert that boiler. We've got that in our capital plans. It's always been there. And then we have to go through the testing process. And that's where it gets a little iffy as to how quickly we'll be able to bring it up to speed using biomass, i.e. no coal or natural gas. So yes, the simple answer to your question is I think without any question, this will accelerate it. They've indicated that that's what they expect and anticipate doing. I think the more interesting question, again, is what do we do beyond 2025? Where are we going to go next? How do we build an ecosystem across the state of Iowa and the region for using biomass materials where we all seem to be stuck on some degree of coal and a lot of natural gas? That ain't going to fly longer term. And I think this relationship in particular, I think all of us believe as we started working with this company that we'll talk about next week with more specificity, they're leaders in this field.
Thank you. I appreciate
So I would say, President Richards, just you begged sort of a wrap up. Look, I think obviously we wouldn't have done all the work that we've done if we didn't think this was and we wouldn't be here with you today talking about it in such incredible detail if we didn't think it was really important, but also didn't think it was, we all believe it's really the right thing to do. I think, as I said a moment ago, I think the status quo, I think, should be unacceptable to Iowans. I think we've got a great asset here at the University of Iowa. I think we've got great talent. And everywhere we look, they've been fighting with one arm behind their back, so to speak, fiscally. And I think it's about time that we actually get really focused on what we need to deliver to students in the 21st century to make them really productive citizens of our state and region. And what we're doing right now is okay, but it's not good enough. We owe them much better, and we can do that. I think we have very good plans for how to do that. And I think we've built a very collaborative governance process across this university with a lot of voices coming together as one. And I think you'll see that if you're, and all of you have spent a lot of time on our campus. So I think this is critical. I think while we said that, it's just, these are early days of P3s across the United States, I think you're going to see a floodgate of these open up, because every state in the union's got, every public institution in higher ed in every state has got this set of issues. And if we don't do these types of mechanisms, we're going to find them all either continuing to have more struggles with enrollment declines and all the rest, or they're going to private in many ways. If you take a look at the last 20 years of rankings, there's a reason why it's increasingly more supported by, more made up of private institutions. And that's simply put, the institutions now are bigger than the state's short-term willingness to fund them. And this is a very important mechanism of breaking out of that. I think it will be good for us, be good particularly for our students and their families. I always remind our students, you better be careful as you join any institution what the brand's going to be on your resume 10 or 20 years from now. We owe them higher rankings, not lower. And that's what this project is all about. I appreciate all the time all of you have spent on it. We wouldn't be here without the incredible support you provided us, including all the tough questions you're asking, and appropriately so. But I also want to thank this team here at this university, because there are a group of people that are not allowed to go celebrate just yet. We've got some work to do, but we're getting quickly to the point where we can look back on the last year or two and say it's been an amazing year and a very momentous, maybe even tremendously momentous period in the university's history. I yield.
Thank you. If there's no further questions, I think we'll end this webinar. I do want to remind the board that we have a meeting next Tuesday at 10 a.m. to go over this again, probably in as much, maybe not as much detail as we did today, but we will go through we'll plug the numbers in, and there'll be another opportunity for all of us to ask questions. And then hopefully we'll agree on the selection of an operator by the end of that meeting. So I'm going to declare this webinar over unless anybody has any other further statements. Thank you.
Thank you.